Monica Ellis. I'm CEO of Global Water Challenge and the Global Environment and Technology Foundation. And we are an organization that helps mobilize collective action opportunities in public health, in water security, and water access in around 100 countries around the world. Happy to have you all join us. We have a packed room for our conversation on having a net water positive impact at the catchment level. We're going to take a minute and introduce our panelists, and then I'll have a couple of remarks, and then we'll get right into it. All good? You have to move? Okay, thank you. All right, great. Jason.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason Morrison. I'm president of the Pacific Institute. I'll start again. Hi, everyone.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good morning. If you're coming in from North America, Latin America. My name is Jason Morrison. I'm the president of the Pacific Institute and the head of the UN Global Compact's CO Water Mandate, which is a water stewardship commitment platform that's been in existence since 2007.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is James Dalton. I'm the head of water and land management at IUCN, the International Union for the Conservation of Nature.
Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Alexander, and I'm Water Stewardship Lead for Diageo.
Hi, I'm Michael Clément, and I'm Water Stewardship Lead for Nestlé Waters.
Hello, my name is Paul Rieg. I'm the founder of a company called Blue Risk, and we help companies respond to emerging water challenges.
Hello, my name is Pierre Kistler. I'm working for the Global Program Water from the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Great, thank you all. And I've always wanted a band of brothers in water, and so this is what I have here today. I'm so excited to do that. But really, no, it's kind of a sobering fact that in just a few years, about half of the world is going to be facing water scarcity. And we all know, just as humans and individuals, the quality of water, the reliability of water, our access to water affects the kind of life that we have. And so we have to find ways to mobilize our action to address those challenges really at the catchment level. A number of the discussions that we'll have today will really be on the why focus on the catchment level. That's going to be the first part of our conversation. And then how, what's working, what's not. And then lastly, we're going to talk about some trends. So if we project to next year's World Water Week, what are we going to see? What are we going to hope? Are we all going to be moving in the right direction, the places where people are most affected? So let's kick off our conversation with Jason and maybe give us, for your at least 25, I would say, plus years of working as a leader in water stewardship and guiding so many companies and supply chains in this issue, what are you seeing, and talk a little bit about the why.
So for a while now, businesses have recognized that water-related risk for them manifests at the basin scale. And so if you think of a company that would try to reduce water-related risks simply by being really efficient with water, that will not typically de-risk the operations, because if that reliability of supply goes away, or if you have your supply, but communities where you're operating don't have supply, that's a real tense situation. So companies have started to, have a long time now known that if you want to try to mitigate risk or even preempt the really challenging times, that you need to start thinking about engaging externally. There's an imperative to do that, and to try to focus those efforts in terms of the basin outcomes that make a more water secure and resilient basin for the entire community.
Great, good. What concepts are you most excited about maybe going forward? We're going to talk a bit more about this later in the panel, but just kind of previewing where you're seeing the direction going from replenish to net positive. Maybe.
So something that's emerged that I am really excited about personally is this concept about being water positive. And one of the reasons that it's interesting to me or exciting to me is that it really signifies an elevation of the ambition here. Because if you think about CSR back in the 80s, the whole premise behind CSR is this kind of do no harm mindset. But inherent is the idea of having a positive impact on water is really kind of stepping into this idea of being part of the solution. It's not just like we're going to mitigate our own impact. We're actually wanting to be a part of solving for water. And I think there are a number of companies now that are embracing that level of ambition, or really in not just water, there's other dimensions of sustainability where I think companies have realized this is a key societal challenge and we want to be a part of the solution for it. So I think the level of ambition is exciting to me. In terms of water, the way that okay, let me back up a little bit. So the Sea Water Mandate had an initiative that launched within it 2 years ago called the Water Resilience Coalition. And it really was born out of a number of companies saying, if you step back and look globally at trends on water, we are not on track. And the midterm report that UN Water came out with bears that out and has shown that for some of the indicators under SDG 6, we have to quadruple our pace to meet our 2030 goals. So, and there's a lot of freshwater data trends going in the wrong direction. And this is alarming, but I think a lot of the leading companies realized we need to do more and we need to do it faster. And we started having a conversation around what does that look like? And that's where the notion of net positive water impact was born. And an important aspect of it from where we sit is that it does not just focus on water volumes. Net positive water impact is also recognizing other key dimensions of water, water quality and accessibility to water, the social equity dimension, whether the communities actually have the water they need for their basic needs, but also for their economic livelihood. So embedded in this concept are those three dimensions. What I also like about it is as a North Star, or something that you can think about as an aspiration to reach, it is universally applicable. We crafted NPWI, net positive water impact, so that it directly aligns with 4 of the 6 targets of SDG 6. And we as a global community have said we have a goal on water for 2030, the water access and sanitation and hygiene targets within it, the water quality target, and then we also have a target around water security or water availability. So the way we're thinking about it is that any company that sets an ambition around net positive water impact is playing their part in trying to accelerate progress toward our shared goals on water. Last thing I want to say, back to this idea of being universally applicable, because it is that North Star, but locally tailorable. And we all recognize water is hyper-local. So when you think about what does it mean to try to address the key water challenge in one basin, it may be the water quality issue, it may be the water access issue in another, but it allows for a global strategy to be applied locally in ways that's hitting the most important issue in that basin. And you can find others that are interested in working on it together, which is the last part that I'll make about the cool thing about net positive water impact is that if multiple enterprises have set the same ambition, there's a natural alignment that opens the door for collective action, because in geographies where you have shared interests, you now have shared purpose. And that is an important unlock that sets the stage for how we can work together in that basin on the issue most important in that basin and measure our progress against basin outcomes, which at the end of the day, we have to accept has to be the metric of whether or not you are making conditions better. It can't just be around whether you've got saved 300,000 cubic meters. That doesn't really matter, right? It matters on whether at the end of the day, the basin is in balance when it comes to water supply reliability and that you're within the sustainable limits of groundwater recharge, et cetera.
Exactly right. And I wanted you to spend a little bit more time on that, because you'll see as this panel unfolds, when you have that common vision at the basin level and all these different actors have targets that they're moving and they're contributing to the same goals, laddering up to the SDGs, you can get that moonshot. You can get it accomplished. But right now, everyone's still kind of doing their own thing. They're doing it well, but it's not integrated and laddering up to this goal that we're all working towards. So thank you for sharing that. Go ahead. Do you want to say something?
If I could say one more thing. The other thing that the Water Resilience Coalition has done is it has set a collective ambition for 2030 to have positive water impact in 100 water stressed basins. And so I know for those that are in the water sector that have really gotten tangled up in how do you calculate footprint and net, I get the challenges of that and some don't like it. But to the degree to which you set a collective ambition around positive water impact, then at the end of the day, what you are trying to achieve is whether or not those outcomes across the 3 dimensions of stress I talked about are being realized at the basin scale. And that's pretty clear whether you can measure it. I like that about MPWI because it's measurable. We can tell whether or not we've made progress on water quality
Exactly.
and on accessibility.
No, it's very excited. So we're going to pass the mic down to Pierre. And Pierre, share from a cooperating agency perspective what you think about target setting and collective action at the catchment level and what you're seeing and how do you plug in and what advice do you have for everybody here?
Thank you. And I think, as Jason said, we need really to increase our ambitions. It's really time to do that and maximize impact. But if we talk about impact, first of all, I think we have all maybe different definition of positive impact because it depends on the objective we have, of course. And an agency development agency has maybe not the same objectives as maybe a big company or others, even if I think some of them are the same. Of course, if we can call for positive impact, it means that we can join it with sustainable development and of course alleviate poverty because it's our main impact, our main objective. So if we can talk about a positive impact, of course we have to consider also these issues. And of course we have to report to its taxpayer money, so we have to report to the population, and maybe a company has to other people, to shareholders or something like this. But I think we can find some way to work together and to all move together. And therefore, I think as agency, what is our role? Of course, we can have a funding role. We can finance some projects, some initiatives that we think that goes in the right direction. We don't have an unlimited budget, so this is a possibility. But the other one, and I think this is more stronger, is to have a broker role and to put people together and different stakeholders together in order to move in the right direction. I can just present one example that we did the last years to put all together in a kind of alignment exercise, all the water stewardship actors. One of them are in the panel today. And it was very interesting to see, because the water world, as you all know, is very fragmented, and to bring together different stakeholders in order to go to put their energy, maybe a little bit also their money to go to fix some common objective. I think it's also our role to maybe bring together these different stakeholders. So we can facilitate such kind of initiative, of alignment exercise. We can also work maybe at a more global level. Of course, the catchment level is very important. I think we have to see the water cycle in the whole, and maybe to consider also of course the surface water, but also the groundwater. But something else, the catchment level has no borders, no borders.
Right.
And sometimes they are transboundary, and most of them are transboundary. And then it becomes quite complicated because the rules are not the same from one country to the other. That's why we developed a big program, a transboundary program called Blue Peace, where we consider the water as entry door for peace transaction between different countries, taking the water. And there, of course, the groundwater becomes very, very a big issue. And I think in that we can help to bring to go to entry door as a water diplomacy level, but also at concrete projects on the ground, and to with this both initiative we can bring together at a more multi-country level. And there, the River Basin Organization plays an important role. And I think this is also a key player when we could talk about transboundary water. Maybe this is quite common, but the impact depends also on the context, because in some area you have, of course, regulation that are well in place with water that is in sufficient manner here. but in other places it becomes much more difficult when the rules are lacking a lot, and where the companies, but also some NGOs have maybe a leading role in that, and we have to take care that everybody are at the same level. And secondly, maybe at the global level, we have also to go a little bit. It was said in many sessions that I participated here in Stockholm. We have to go out of the water bottle, as we say, and to speak to other people too. And we don't have to forget we talked a lot about climate change this week, but also on the food crisis, and also health. And I think all these sectors have to work more together than before. Of course, that's ideal world, but I think we go in that direction slowly, and we can, as cooperation agency, also help in moving in that direction.
Great. Thank you so much. That's super helpful. We'll pass the mic to Michael. Michael, from the private sector, share some of your perspectives from Diageo, what you're finding in your work at the catchment level with your partners, what needs to improve. Sure.
Yeah, okay, I'll see what I can do. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. So I'm Michael from Diageo. Just very briefly on Diageo, we're a global alcohol beverage company with brands like Smirnoff, Guinness, Johnnie Walker, Baileys, Tanqueray, and others. And we operate in about 30 countries in the world, of which about a dozen are highly water stressed, and about a third of our volume is manufactured or produced in highly water stressed areas. So we have a very, very strong skin in the game in terms of water stewardship. And we actually practice water stewardship in about 12 countries. I could list them if you want, but in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and India mainly. And I just wanted to quickly explain, in Diageo, we have a mantra around simplicity. And I think I'm probably in the wrong place for that, but we strongly advocate that to try and get more agility and more decisive decision-making in our business. And it's something that comes from the very top. And our water strategy reflects that. So we have a 4-pillar water strategy. First, in the supply chain, i.e. upstream supply chain, mainly ag, but there's plenty of other suppliers in our supply chain that are using lots of water, but it's mostly ag. Secondly, in our operations, so water efficiency and water use and water discharge. Thirdly, in the community, which is around our replenishment and our collective action programs. So we have specific numerical targets for replenishment, but we also slightly uniquely have a specific numerical target for collective action, living, and breathing the collective action mantra. And the 4th pillar is our advocacy and basically our communications and global advocacy pillar. So very simply, that's the kind of four-pillared approach we take, and we've taken it for over a decade now. So there's continuity there, which is hugely important. Why do we do it? So that's what you're asking the question, is why? Well, I think Jason kind of touched on it at the very beginning. Very clearly, it's around risk management, but it's also about business continuity, and it's about license to operate. And critically, for us, it's about business growth. Our business is growing. We're lucky enough that it's doing well. We're investing, we're expanding, we're creating new jobs, we're paying more taxes. We're also using more water as a result. So we want to be managing our risk around that, but also seeing it as a competitive advantage. So it's not just about risk around climate, not risk about reputation, risk around policy and regulation, about government, but it's also about opportunity. It's opportunity to gain competitive advantage and to perhaps even gain market share, which is our 2 big drivers in our performance ambition, together with our ESG strategy, to really deliver on those. So that's the why. The why is clear. The other reason why we do it at the catchment level is, unlike many companies you might speak to, Diageo doesn't have a foundation. This is all paid for by the markets. It's all paid for at the P&L of individual markets on an annual basis, which makes a big difference. It's at the heart of those businesses. It's not like, oh, well, we'll get 50% from the head office through the foundation and we'll donate 50%. I'm not dismissing that. That's hugely important. But actually, when you have it on your MDs, managing directors, P&L every year with a scorecard to deliver, which he does or she does, then it really becomes embedded. And that's at the catchment level. That's the kind of front line of delivering collective action and replenishment, but also the other 2 pillars of our strategy. I think what I would say in terms of approaches, you asked me briefly to talk about, I will be brief, about approaches, is first first of all, I explained our strategy because I wanted to make it simple. And if you in the room understand that very quickly, then that means our leaders are going to understand it. So that's hugely important, that buy-in at the leadership level. And I'm sure that applies not just to businesses, but it applies, and being able to articulate your strategy in what is quite a complex area, as we all know, is hugely important and very most important first step. The other bit is the business case. So the compelling business case, I spend a lot of time explaining the business case, and Jason touched on it earlier, but increasingly that's around climate risk and climate adaptation and business resilience and also opportunity to grow. You know, you can grow your business and double your production if you're not addressing the systemic issues in the catchment. And that message is getting across very, very quickly in terms of because of the height of the climate change agenda and because of the carbon kind of net zero campaigning, you know, that's much more aware in our world, and indeed in the investor world, which is an important stakeholder. So we've engaged our leaders. We've told them how important it is in terms of the compelling business case. We've kept it simple. We've chosen the right partners, hopefully, not always, but that is also driven locally. So there's not a kind of global mandate. Here's your partner, take it or leave it. You own it, you pay for it, you choose your partners. Here's the framework. Here's the tram lines, deliver. Here's your KPI. Here's your number. You're green or red, bang. So it's too simplistic perhaps, but it's effective. And you asked me about what kind of approaches were effective. It is effective. And it might be very one-dimensional, and it may be not ideal, but in terms of actually getting stuff done on the ground and delivering stuff, then I think it's hugely important. With that comes ruthless prioritization. And that's, I suppose, the case we all face in all our organizations, but businesses are pretty good at it, sometimes a bit too good at it, perhaps, but we are ruthless about that. And, you know, in water, it's probably not that difficult because it's down to the level of stress and the level of risk exposure you have in that catchment. So we have 12 priority water basins that we ruthlessly prioritize, but we do water efficiency everywhere around the world. We have a target level for water efficiency for non-water stress and water stress sites. So that's hugely important as well, but prioritization is key. And the context of business growth, as I said earlier. If I finish, and I will, on the limits of where we are today, I think communications is one of our biggest. You know, I feel really enthused by what we've achieved in the last 6 days. Well done for making it to day 6 or day 7 or whatever. But I feel, but we're often talking to ourselves. It's a big group and it's a big community. So I'm really keen to get that message out to a broader community, but to keep it simple. And the multiple approaches that we know about and the different guides and the different protocols that we have are very challenging as well to try and simplify and present compellingly to the business. We do have problems with resources as well, people to deliver on the ground. And sometimes our expectations are too high for our colleagues that are working the markets at the breweries and distilleries around the world that we're asking to engage in this. And finally, I think my last kind of challenge I face in the business, and we're getting better at it, is basically time perspective. Companies are judged on the short-term performance. Their share price goes up and down by the second. They have we no longer have quarter reporting, but we have 6-monthly reporting. We're trying to move to a 3-year strategy. We've set the guidance to the city or to the investors on a 3 to 5 year basis rather than an annual basis. But traditionally, companies only ever look at a 2-3 year strategy. And I'm sure that's the case for many in this room. And they actually legally only needed to report to a 3-year basis. We need our business to look more longer than that. So when Task Force of Climate-Related Financial Disclosure came in, that forced businesses to think long term, and they had a conflict. You know, actually our financial reporting is only a 2 to 3 year, but you're asking if there's 5, 10, 20 year kind of perspective. So that kind of time horizon and planning and getting the business to pivot towards a longer term perspective is quite difficult. But we're getting there, and there are some carrots there in terms of the opportunity to do that better and to manage risk, but also sticks in terms of TCFD and your expectation to report. And that disclosure is just getting more significant in the US as well. And we're listed in the US. So again, bit dry, but very important in terms of our planning and our resource planning and commitment. So hopefully that gives you a kind of feel for how a company is doing it on the coal face, as it were, the wrong analogy. But I really hope that, you know, what we do and share in occasions like this gives, we learn, but we also can share what we're doing.
To your point on communication, just a really quick follow-up. How are your brands engaged? So to drive collective action and consumer awareness with the mainstream, are any of your brands involved in that?
They are
for water
locally.
and waste?
I'm yet to persuade, Smirnoff or Johnny Walker that water is most important. They can relate to carbon and trees a bit easier than they can to water. I think Guinness, where it's made locally in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, or some tequila, for example, in highly stressed Jalisco in the northwest of Mexico, there's better move. I think it's the brand managers and directors need convincing that consumers care and that they're going to buy their brand against another brand. So corporately, nobody buys or drinks Diageo.
It's across the whole food.
So
beverage
it's
sector.
it's difficult to address, but
Yeah.
we are building sustainability and ESG, sustainability type brand plans within those key
Good.
global brands, and we're prioritizing 3 brands to try and show that it works. But there's a little bit about push and pull with consumers, and I think I would argue you need to push harder and actually persuade consumers this is important, rather than waiting for consumers to say they want it. So
Agreed.
it's difficult, and the alcohol sector is not the most obvious sector. It's a luxury.
Yes.
Not a day-to-day
No, that's
purchase. It's a
exactly right.
luxury.
You're absolutely right.
So that means it's meant to be. So
In
without
Stockholm,
God,
it
it's
is-
sometimes
it
a little
is
bit of a
day to
treat.
day.
And
Yeah,
when you
yes,
treat
the treat,
yourselves, you don't
yes.
always think necessarily about the saving the planet.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Michael. Let's go to James. James, maybe just take, from your 25 years or so of experience plus and talk to us about the why, the importance of collective action at the catchment level. And then we'll transition to the next segment of our panel.
Sure. I mean, I think, I'm looking at this not just from sort of these businesses here, but from a broader perspective across lots of different companies. There are a lot of tangible solutions that are happening out there right now, and some really good things that are happening. So I think, we should understand that the market around corporate water stewardship is accelerating all the time, and Jason's very much part of that as a consequence of that. And there's an increasing level of awareness and understanding from the businesses about what they need to do and what they can do, what they should be doing. And I think there's probably less frustration as well from many of them. It was a frustrating space 5-6 years ago when there were lots of different methodologies and discussions going on. That sort of settled down, and groups have sorted themselves out, and there's much clearer, better frameworks and simpler, again, as you were saying, that can be applied and used and shared and communicated. I think from my side and IUCN, who I represent, one of the things that we're seeing are businesses wanting to use water stewardship as an entry point into other things that they could be doing around nature-based solutions, for example. So how do they incorporate that into their planning to protect their sites? How do they work with the communities that live around their sites or are their workforce? How do they use that for bringing in biodiversity benefits and carbon benefits? And so they can start to stack a little bit what those interests are together. That makes a lot of sense because they've got different pressures, different sort of expectations from shareholders and groups who are looking at them. So there's a logic to that transition. And also, if you put the effort into stewardship, you put the effort into the networks and the collective action that you're trying to create, you've already got a resource that you could use as a business for a whole range of other things. It also helps if you are a big fish in a basin. Sometimes what I've seen, and you recognize this because my main experience with this was in northern Tanzania, is if you are a big company and you are concerned about water where you are, either because of competition or pollution or access, whatever it may be, by dealing with it and solving it, you raise attention to all of those other water users around you, including utilities and smaller businesses. If they're looking at it, why aren't we? We need the same resource. We might have the same problems. So big businesses that are trying to solve this problem can become real anchors within river basins for those types of issues. And it really helps pull everybody together. So you're driving collective action with effectively those that you're competing with for water, but not in terms of a direct conversation, but you're helping them swim in the same direction. That's a real positive if you can bring them on board because it fosters new relationships.
Well said. Yeah.
I think, we've seen some good work in the Lower Mekong on flood risk management. The businesses have been involved with it includes local communities, really well thought through things that bring public good and value to communities as well. And I think two things that I think are still an opportunity. One is working on your non-operated lands. So if you are a business that has impact over a large land area or a concession over a large land area, but your actual impact, your interest, or your site is only a percentage of that, but you have the ability to influence far broader than that through your networks. That's also a form of collective action. You can change land use behavior as well, which brings you potentially water benefits and a whole range of these other things I mentioned earlier, carbon and biodiversity. And then finally, I think one missing piece of the puzzle, and it's always a bit of an uncomfortable thing to raise with businesses in the room, is to work with regulators. You know, I'd be really interested to know from Siwi the statistics about how many regulatory agencies are actually here this week, because we always forget that they're actually part of the solution. They're often underfunded and they're under-resourced. And we always tend to blame regulation for not working well enough in terms of how it protects and controls and manages systems. But the reason for that is that they're never part of the picture. They often don't see their role as solving the problem. Theirs is just to do, not to actually act upon it. And I think that's a missing piece of the puzzle, that there is a lot that could be shared from businesses, because it helps level the playing field in the basin. It helps bring everybody up to speed. It helps share experience, and it helps therefore improve the resource for everybody. And that is business contributing beyond collective action. That's also about business contributing to the public good. So I think there's a few areas that are growing that could be done, you know, could become the new area of stewardship as it matures over time. But certainly there's a general maturity in stewardship and a settling down and an embedding that in and more coming to the table. And I think that's a real positive. And I think one thing that I tend to get a little bit frustrated of is when there is the expectation that business should pay. And I think that's deeply unfair. Business is doing what business does. When you're engaging in stewardship, you're already investing beyond your borders to try and get a result for you, but also a result that benefits to others as well. And I think they can contribute, but they also shouldn't be fundraising the public good. That's an issue of why the regulator is not working very well. It's an issue of broader water governance. And that's really a look back at the governments to ask them, what are you doing to fix the situation, rather than expecting others to fix it for you? And I think that's a conversation that still needs to happen. Thanks.
Preach, James. Yes. I agree with you 100%. That's awesome. All right. Well, we're going to move to the second part where we're going to be talking about how this is actually playing out in catchments and how it works very concretely and practically. And so, Mikhail, you'll start off by giving us some examples. Let's get everybody in here, giving us some examples from Nestle Waters and what you're finding working at the catchment level. One thing I'll say, just from some engagement that we've had with Nestle Waters this past year, is real leadership on the analytics and understanding and creating these public good pieces of data and insights, Diageo as well, but around what's happening in these watersheds. And because you are working everywhere, it's very helpful when you share that and you can get everybody together around a common vision and move forward. So
Thank you.
Yeah.
Look, we were supposed to be provocative, and actually I'm almost, I agree with everything that has been said so far. So, no, just kind of a reminder, very quick, but indeed we took this commitment 2 years ago, a bit less than 2 years ago, to contribute to the regeneration of the local water cycles, but everywhere we operate. On this, we have to do it by 2025. So it's a bit challenging. It's 2025, it's like tomorrow. So I don't want to play with the words. And we had this discussion a little bit before. We are very engaged in, of course, in the discussions, the debates on the words like net positive, regeneration. This is important for sure. But one of the learning, we knew it before, is that it happens in the end. It happens on the field, and as Michael mentioned, it's the same for us. The people who do are in our markets, in our sites. They're not in Stockholm. So we need. I think it's our responsibility to translate all these debates. But in the end, it has to be done. Something has to be done, and to be very operational. So the first learning I would say is that if we had to wait for the perfect or a consensus on the what is a perfect project, what is the most transformative project with the maximized impact. If we had to wait for that, we wouldn't do anything. So what we say to our teams now is, you need to start. So we have some references, like we use the VWBA, and we know, of course, it's beyond volumes. If there is no issue with the quantity today or in the future, then we will have a look at the other issues for sure. But the most important is to start and not to be afraid potentially to fail at a moment, because failing because we are experimenting new methodologies, and sometimes also just failing. But when you start, in fact, it's virtuous always. You can start small, but when you build some new projects, you will fine tune your knowledge of the local context. Always it can be theoretical at the beginning, it becomes empirical, and also, and I think that's the most important, you develop your relations with the local stakeholders. And it's been said this week, and I guess I'm kind of breaking down an open door, but this is always to us the most important piece, and sometimes the most time-consuming piece. Not all of our teams are very comfortable to go and talk to all the stakeholders, the mayor, the farmer, and but yet they have to do it. So that's the first learning. The second one is, it will be, say, we need to come back to the basics. Like we talk a lot about projects, but there will be no relevant projects if there is not a very good and very accurate analysis of the shared local water challenges. And so I just want to advocate here for AWS. This is a system that we use. There's a book, it's a book. You don't have to be certified, but it's been developed more than 10 years ago now. My feeling is that it works, and more and more companies, I'm sorry, I just saw Adrian trying to get in from AWS, but more and more companies are joining. I have a feeling that there is at least a kind of consensus of the fact that it covers what has to be covered. It's just the beginning, AWS, but at least it covers quantity, quality, biodiversity through the important water related areas. It covers WASH. It covers governance. So it's a very good start. And now, there are different versions. I think it's more operational. So we can talk about the, Diageo or Nestle or others, but here there are plenty of companies in Stockholm who are asking, where should I start? Even SMEs. And they need something simple, as you mentioned. It has to be simple and very operational. The last piece, again, just to us, the challenge, I would say, of course, it's external. We need resources, expertise, but it's very much internal because it's the same. The projects we will deliver, it comes from the budgets, from the markets and the sites. So you need to convince them, but you can convince them so that they understand it's important. They do understand it's important, but in fact, they need the business case. So every tool we have now, every new tool that will allow us to better show that it's not in silos, there are co-benefits. And today we talk about the social return on investment. If we can show them that project will be optimized because it will tackle both water, biodiversity, plus we'll be able to measure the value in terms of human well-being. For us, that would be the magical recipe. So this is what we need today.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. And that is what we do a lot of as well, is when we're working with companies, understanding what their whole sustainability agenda is, getting that recipe together that really manifests at the geographic level and seeing how we can put together approaches that will deliver co-benefits across that whole portfolio. So $1 is spent across all, and then we try to leverage it some more with other stakeholders. So it's good. Paul Rieg.
Thank you.
Thank you. I wondered if you could share some of your advice for companies and how to work with stakeholders at the local level and how this all manifests, and just, you're working on, I think, as we've talked right now, just about frameworks, the good, happy rising of the sun at the end of those frameworks is that we're all kind of laddering up now. We've digested all the information. We've aligned our enterprises, I think, to them, and now we can ladder up with the prioritization of the basin. So what advice do you have for companies wanting to do this at the local level?
Yeah, so thank you, Monica, and really great insight so far. I really appreciate the honesty and openness of the panel and sharing. So the first thing is that we've learned along the way, and we're working with companies on the implementation of programs, and that requires interacting with local markets, people and facilities partners on the ground. And one of the things that we've seen is if you want to have a measurable impact in the basin and do that in a way that's engaging with stakeholders, a lot happened before the company got to that point, and that really shouldn't be underlooked. We did a piece of work last year with Andre at AB InBev and TNC, and they said, look, how can we accelerate companies getting to the point where they can have that impact? And we worked with them to identify what are the minimum requirements, what are those minimum ingredients that a company needs to have an impact at the catchment level. And we landed with 5, and it is oversimplistic, but I think we need to oversimplify.
That's good. Yeah.
And we built off of all the frameworks that are out there in AWS and, you know, all the industry specific frameworks, BEER, ICMM, IPECA. We looked at all of them, and kind of these 5 ingredients bubbled up. 2 of the ingredients have to happen at an enterprise level, right? The first one is awareness, right? What's the company's dependency, impact, you know, relationship with water, and where? Once you know that, you can start to define what your ambition is, right? What's your role in this? What do you want to achieve? And then what's your strategy to deliver? Not just what you want to achieve, how are you going to achieve it, right? What are your strengths? Where are you going to play in what basins? The other 3 ingredients happen at the catchment level. So note how quickly you need to get attention from the enterprise to the catchment. The catchment level, you need assessment and understanding. We talked about this, of the catchment from a social perspective, environmental, political, regulatory, understand those shared challenges. Then you need action, meaningful action, prioritize action where it matters most, align with stakeholders, building on what's already out there. And then lastly, measurement. Lastly, but not least, you need to measure to understand the direction of travel and whether or not you need to go back and adjust and tweak and learn and adapt, right? So all those ingredients are necessary, right? So just that's my first point. If you want to have an impact, it's great, but make sure you have other things in place so you can actually do it. So a few learnings from on the ground at a catchment level related to stakeholders on the assessment piece. If you do the catchment diagnostic through AWS or other ways, it's not uncommon to come back with many shared challenges, right? Particularly if you're doing that in consultation with stakeholders. There'll be a long list of challenges and issues today into the future. So one thing that we found works really well is to overlap the shared challenges that your stakeholders care most about with those that are most related to your business, right? And your footprint and what your core business colleagues care about. So you kind of overlap and you try to identify what's the goal or the priority, maybe 1 or 2 to align with and aim to influence, but don't try to do everything. And I think I heard someone say, you know, prioritize, you know, ruthlessly, learn how to say no, right? So that you can really align internal actions within your business and the facilities or within your procurement teams, as well as the external collective actions towards a common goal that you can really move the needle. That's kind of one learning. The other is around stakeholder engagement. This is probably not the case for everyone, but it's really hard, I think, to engage stakeholders, particularly when they might be in opposition of your role in the basin.
They're not sure of the outcome.
They're not sure of the outcome. They don't want you there.
Yeah.
Or you're associated to an industry that stakeholders, you know, don't agree with. Or maybe you've had issues with compliance in the past before your time that are a legacy issue with that company. That's real. That is the world we operate in. So, you know, all of these guides say engage stakeholders. Okay, easily said, really hard to do well. So one thing we found one of our clients did, and it really helped them, they did a very short 2-hour risk assessment. What are the risks of engaging stakeholders to our business? And what are the controls that we need in place to give our markets confidence that they can do it? And if something happens, we have plan B. But that gave the market a lot of confidence to go out there and really engage. And otherwise, at the beginning, they're like, no way. There is no way I'm going to go talk to that regulator, to that group of stakeholders or that community. So that worked really well, identifying the threats and then come up with some controls. Then the last 2 and the assessment piece, we need timelines that are appropriate and that allow for engagement. Right. You know, not all communities, particularly indigenous communities and stakeholder groups, operate at the pace that corporations operate. Right. And we've seen that cause a lot of problems at the local catchment level. So make sure you're setting timelines that are appropriate to engage appropriately in ways that are aligned with the cultural expectations and community expectations that you intend to work with. So that I couldn't emphasize enough. So that's on the assessment side. On the action side, you know, maybe just a couple things. One is, you know, if you've been building relationships with stakeholders, go out and start asking them where you think the opportunities are, because a lot of them know. At one example, one of our clients has a facility in Spain, and you know, as they started to invest in catchment health, the first thing they did is they went to the local basin authority right away.
Absolutely.
And the
Yeah.
Basin Authority had a list of priority unfunded projects ready to go. They're like, thank you. Thank you. 2 projects here, 1 there. Great, line up. Within 12 months, this facility, this market was working with the Basin Authority, implementing meaningful actions that the stakeholders were aligned with. So just go to those stakeholders, particularly if you've built a relationship before, and ask. Oftentimes they have, a lot of projects ready to go. And then on the measurement side, develop a measurement and monitoring plan up front, align with, what's expected in terms of whether you're going to measure outputs, outcomes, or impacts, or all 3, what indicators. Do that up front. Come up with a plan. It's not that hard, so that when you're starting to implement, whether you're working with a regulator, a basin authority, an NGO, or someone else, you clearly can communicate really upfront what's needed to, at the end of the day, demonstrate progress and ultimately demonstrate impact. And then don't be afraid to learn and adjust. I was really impressed by a client who halfway through the kind of their target rollout at their assets realized that they'd gotten something wrong. It had to do with the timelines of engaging communities and indigenous peoples. And they were open to reevaluating the timelines and the approach to doing it halfway through. I was really impressed by their willingness to adapt and learn. So I think we shouldn't be afraid of that. Okay, so 2 more things. Barriers, some of the barriers that we're seeing, and then a couple opportunities. On the barrier side, I think we need to be cautious with overly prescriptive and very stringent requirements coming from international stakeholders and headquarter offices. Sometimes we build these bulletproof strategies that aim to do everything, but they're so bulletproof that when you're on the ground and something changes, the markets don't have the flexibility and the wiggle room to adjust. And we've seen that with a couple big clients that come back 3 years after developing a beautifully scientific strategy. And guess what? My sourcing basin changed. I want to invest there. No, you can't. Your KPIs in this basin, but the risk is there. And so are my stakeholders. Sorry, you got to do it there. What? So we need to think about building in flexibility and room to adapt. And that really sits in the hands of folks in corporate headquarters and external stakeholders who are banging on the doors of companies saying, do more of this, do more of that. Watch what we wish for. I would really caution us to not be over prescriptive. Companies, I think, face huge institutional barriers to getting stuff done. So I think that's one of the barriers. And then both of you touched on the importance of building this into the markets and to the local teams. I couldn't agree more. We see a lot of emphasis and excitement and effort and doing things great at corporate headquarters, but let's resource and build capacity within the companies at the local level, because they're the ones that are going to have to deliver. And oftentimes we engage a site and they say, look, I had a job description. I was doing, 40, 60 hours a week. And overnight I get tacked on engage stakeholders, do a basin diagnostic and deliver projects. He already had 40 hours of work scheduled, all these responsibilities. He wasn't even a water professional. So let's build capacity. Let's understand what it takes, and let's allocate resources to these sites, to the markets that really allows them to do that. So those are 2 barriers that we see a lot. And then opportunities, one, just kind of building on the last point, let's build local capacity within the companies in core functions, procurement, operations planning, finance, risk, it has to be core and embedded into the business. And then lastly, I touched on the example of the Basin Authority. It's normal that we love to work with NGOs to implement projects, but they're only one tool in the toolbox.
Absolutely.
They're a phenomenally important tool, and I'm not undervaluing the role of NGO partners to implement, but there are other tools in the toolbox. They're basin authorities, they're the development agencies,
There's plumbers.
Exactly. They're regulators. So we've seen some amazing success stories of companies going and identifying other pathways to implement projects that deliver really, really amazing impact that may be not traditional. So I think that's a huge opportunity, and maybe top of the list in that is farmers. Right.
Absolutely.
Go work in your supply chain, go work with other farmers and co-ops, because, the opportunities to deliver impact at scale across issue areas, working with farmers, I think is really huge. I'll stop there.
Farmers deliver for sure. Just one quick build on your list of projects that governments give, just keep in mind, and I would say this to our corporate partners, and maybe they've experienced it. I certainly have. Sometimes that list you get is a last mile list that there's a reason those projects could not get done. And it's a wish list that may not be achievable. I'm speaking from experience here, that you're getting recommendations for very challenging places to reach. So just vet it very closely first. That's all I would say. Okay, thank you so much. So much rich information there. We're going to do one more question. Then I think I may mix it up and let our audience ask some questions and then come back to you all for some summary, because we've been talking for a bit. So James, IUCN has been working for quite some time across 160 countries. What are some of your tangible examples of how this works best? You had some really great insights on the first question. What would you share?
I think, well, for me, just thinking through, in fact, I don't want to point it out, but I think one of the examples I've seen that I liked the most is actually a Diageo example, and that's we can sort that out later on.
Yes, I may come back to him. So,
And it actually,
okay, good. All right. I'll come to you.
and it actually wasn't really anything to do with water. It was to do with barley production
Mhm.
and a consistency in quality and a change in government policy, which meant, I have to make sure I'm not saying anything I shouldn't here, a change in policy that meant that they had to source locally from the government policy change. So they realized that the farmer quality and consistency was very dependent on the capacity of the farmers and very dependent on the weather. And therefore they needed to work with the farmers to build a better level of quality of consistency of their supply. And in putting that effort in, they worked with a network of universities and agricultural research capacity in the region. So they use local knowledge that was consistently understood with that particular geography as what's the right thing to do. And they built capacity of the farmers so that they were getting better yields. And they used that knowledge that they'd gained to also start diversifying crops. And so it built income. It allowed and contributed to local and regional food security because the farmers were producing more food crops. They used that possibility, the farmers, to be able to get a better price for their product from Diageo, and the futures of that pricing structure that they had, they were able to get loans from the bank, which they couldn't get before because there was never a consistency in price. So they used the relationship they had with farmers from a stewardship perspective to build better value for them, better consistency for the business. So I think it's those types of small, innovative possibilities, very context specific, but it's those that actually really build the value of stewardship into business thinking. The second thing is something I've seen, and actually I was hoping to talk to somebody here about it this week, but I haven't found them.
Well, if they're in the room.
Is the Lusaka Water Stewardship Initiative in Zambia. And Lusaka is heavily dependent on groundwater. It's heavily overpumped and it's heavily polluted.
With nitrates, for sure.
So they have serious problems, and where they would have to source from on the Kafui, a long way away, pumps, very expensive for the country for the city to afford that. They also have a problem with just unregulated land use planning and catchment zones, recharge zones being built upon. And what LUCI, the Lusaka Water Stewardship Initiative, did was it pulled together a collection of stakeholders, including the municipality and their health authorities and some of the corporates, to try and understand, how do we mitigate this risk? How do we keep business going as a taxpayer, as an employer, as a structural part of the city? How do we keep business going? Because business will use and compete with water over the public sector, and that's not going to work for very much longer. And what that initiative did was it built a stakeholder platform. It used its connections to engage in accessing both sort of grant donor finance, a little bit of philanthropy, but also working with the businesses for direct investment as well. And it got to the point where it was such an attractive platform that they had car bumper stickers made saying "I love Lucy" on cars driving around the city, because the stakeholders were actively engaged in it. But the municipality was fully on board, and it also allowed them to become almost the de facto regulator, because they were able to see where there was inappropriate land use planning, where the rules are being broken, where there was some corruption happening, and to use the power of that collective to raise those issues to help stop those problems. You know, garbage dumped on recharge zones, etc., those types of things. So a very powerful mechanism that for me was probably one of the best initiatives I've seen at that municipal scale.
Well said. No, and there's still a huge nitrates problem, but those initiatives are definitely chipping at it. So thank you for sharing that. Okay. Michael, did you want to share a Diageo example, or was that your example? I'll give you the opportunity. It's okay. If not, we'll go to questions.
I have one. Well, I think the positives I want to take were a couple of kind of learnings from internal and external, and I will be quick because I think it's important to hear from the audience. I think one of the learnings that we've had to try and drive success is to programatize it. So operationalize it. I don't know if that's a verb. Anyway, to make sure it's part of a program, and to have, as I said earlier, good structures around that and good defined KPIs and targets and a set of guidelines and toolkits for the markets, but with the flexibility for the local context, obviously, and ownership. So I think that's really, really important. I think internally as well, maybe stating the obvious again, but is internal buy-in across functions, right? So we certainly for large businesses and also small businesses, you just don't have your sustainability team, but you also have your procurement team, you have your finance team, you have your investor relations team, you have your treasury team. Now, over the last couple of years, success we've had is that they're now nearly all engaged to different levels for their appropriate context of their input. But that kind of global functional cross matrix kind of understanding and commonality of purpose is really important as well. And that comes from the top. It really does. It has to come from leadership, and the resources come with that. But I think that's been an important kind of benefit for us. And I mentioned car markets engaged properly as well. We've talked about that. I think externally in the catchments, say, well, where have you had a great impact? I think measurable positive impact, TBC.
Right.
Right. We've still got to define it a little bit, but also we have anecdotal stuff to say that this is working better, but sometimes it's in the lap of the gods. I shared an example earlier this week about a wash project we did, and again, it was in northern Tanzania. This one, not in the same catchment, but a different one, and it failed because the rains didn't come.
Right.
And we've given them seed, but there was no rain, so they didn't do anything with the seed, and we didn't pay them. And so, so because there are no produce, so it's hugely challenging when it's in the lap of the gods, as it were. But we need to make those communities more resilient. So it didn't stop us, and the project has been successful in terms of access to clean water and sanitation. So we're preparing them for when there is rain, and we're I suppose trying to improve their resilience. And that's hugely important kind of part of our rationale for investing. And I think the other bit I would say around what we're trying to push, and we've touched on it today, but probably more depth earlier, is how can we engage with policy at a local level? And we've started to do that. We've started with WASH because people understand WASH, but we've started to engage our government relations teams around the world in water stressed areas to equip them with the right messages to have conversations with government around policy. Normally when our government relations go in there, they're asking for something. They're either asking for, well, I won't say what they're asking for, but they're asking for something to benefit them. When you go in and have a conversation with it, it's the president's office or the chief finance officer or whatever, or the different departments in which we engage with, tax, and we say to them, we're so pleased that you're doing this. We're delighted that you're investing behind WASH or water infrastructure. We're delighted you've signed a contract with or agreement with World Bank, whatever it might be, just to give support, if nothing else, from an economic contributor and to a business in the private sector is hugely impactful. We want to expand that beyond just WASH. We want to make it a more we want to put into a program, if you like, to engage with governments locally. And I think that, if we're really honest, that's what's going to change the dial the most.
It's so true. And I think even 10 years ago, I remember working with you guys, you were hosting these roundtables across Africa, trying to get other companies to come to the table in the catchment to talk about challenges, what they're doing, what they're experiencing. And it was good leadership play.
Yeah. Well, it's really difficult to persuade internally to persuade companies to invest in that because it's not in their direct interest.
Right.
Replenishment's easier because they can see that it's got a number in there. So that's a community program that takes you to that level.
Right.
But
the
actually
relationship building
to improve the security situation, the water security situation of the whole catchment, You have to be working, with basin authorities or with regulators. You have to be
do.
and building capacity. And I think that's the only way a company is truly going to be able to say that working in collaboration, not individually, to say that they moved it out. So I think that's an important next step, and it's being encouraged by lots of civil society and other actors, as it were. And I think that's one area we're going to go next, and we think we can have impact and have but bring people with us as well and go with others. So it's not just about us leading. So I think those would be the kind of the positives, as I say. And I do think that collective action and our ability to convene and work with others to convene collective action is a major priority for us, and it's a gap. And the final thing I'll say is that companies, including ours, I think have to learn to compromise a little bit for the greater good.
Agreed.
For the bigger catchment. So if it's over the hill from your site, too bad, just go with it.
Yeah.
That's
That's right.
and I think that's, I'll hold the mirror up to ourselves as much as anybody, but that's the kind of cultural behavioral change we need to really get stuff done on the ground.
Time, definitely. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to the audience, and I'm going to ask one of my brothers here to pass the mic, and then we're going to have to pass it back because there's no other mic in here that I see. But thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Let us know who you're with and your
So
question.
thank you. My name is Tom Dyer. I am with the Antea Group in Belgium. Thank you very much for the session. In coming to Stockholm, I had been reading up a bit older reports where was written the assessments that were done by water stewardship that went from a really risk-based perspective to more value-creating perspective. I think some interesting work that also was written by James in that respect, I think. I was wondering where we are now, because I have heard a lot of people representing corporates that indeed speak that language and show nice project results, but are you the exceptions, or do we see that as a general shift going on across the business? And then again, to make a change, we really need to be transformational, look at systems levels. And if you look at corporates, I was wondering to what extent water stewardship or this approach has really touched your business models. How far does it go in transforming your business influenced by water stewardship?
Good questions.
Thank
Bring
you.
that mic on back up here. Thank you. All right. Who wants to take that one?
Yeah, I think if we're honest, I would say that the understanding of the collective action imperative and the engagement of the basin scale is still pretty advanced practice. It's not understood or activated by many in business. That said, the front news headlines with climate related impact on water is pretty obvious to everyone. So there's a lot of companies that are now turning to try to figure out how to come up with strategies around dealing with water related risk. And so, if we can onboard them in a way that helps build their IQ and then get them to the point where they're ready to engage in external collective action initiatives, I think there's a market coming, so to speak. And I think we're ready for them. There's been many of these companies on the bleeding edge of these issues, learning by doing for a long time now. And I think we've been able to put together packages and approaches and tools that can make it a little bit easier than those that had to pioneer doing them at the outset. So that's my response to the first question. Does anyone else want to take?
It's good. And I think I heard you say, Jason, at the beginning in your earlier comments too, is that you're starting to set a menu of options. It's not that you're endorsing these options, but you're setting that menu of options for people to plug in, and you can meet them where they are. If you've got shared challenges in the basin and you're helping shine a light on them, and there's great partners working in them, you're actually helping facilitate solutions and maybe a more aggressive response than we've been able to have in the past.
Yeah, I want to build off of that and maybe go back to your question to some of the other panelists about what's working well.
Mhm.
So when Paul was talking about how, when you kind of figure out where in the enterprise is water showing up, where's risk exposure, where are your impacts, then you get to the basin scale and do the deeper dive diagnostic, figure out what's going on in that basin where you have a hot spot and a risk, right? Well, historically, that's an exercise that companies would do by themselves with whatever consultant they work with. It's a pretty costly way to do it. One of the things that's starting to happen now is we are beginning to do those basin assessments more collectively and transparently so that everyone can benefit from having that information, but it also sets you up well for the door of collective action, right? Because if you have a shared understanding of the priority issues in the basin, you're ready to act on it faster. So I think the barriers to entry or the you know, how hard that is for newcomers is getting easier. It's faster, it's more efficient. And that part I think is pretty exciting. And then the other thing is that when you have that shared assessment and understanding, it allows you to set a baseline. And therefore, when you have collective action where you're trying to measure whether or not you're having impact at the scale, you actually have something to measure against. So for all the NGOs that might be critical of companies that are making claims around whether they're doing anything that's real in these basins, well, actually, if you're starting to be able to measure against a baseline, you can see whether or not you're having any positive impact. And that's an important accountability mechanism for everybody in there. And I would also argue, if you can demonstrate that impact, you've just strengthened the business case for stewardship for those that are in that basin and are thinking, I want to be a part of that because it's clearly working.
Absolutely.
And that's the only long-term way you're going to reduce risk. This is one of the provocative challenges I've always made for the businesses that have been leading on stewardship for a decade through bilateral partnerships. And the question is, how many basins have you de-risked since you started in those areas? 0 is the answer for all of them, because the structure of the collaboration isn't big enough to the size of the problem when you're just doing bilateral partnerships with a great NGO, as great as they are. And I think that's where this unlock for collective action is taking us. And I think that's exciting.
Very much so. Okay.
Just briefly a model, and then I'll hand over to Mikhail. I think our business model has changed a bit, mostly on processes, but the transformative bit might be that we've grown our global teams. We're a very decentralized business model, as I described, in terms of markets and P&Ls, but actually we're growing global teams on ESG, particularly around environmental sustainability, to help those. So that's a pivot. I've been around the business for a while in our business, and we swing a bit from that, but we're definitely pivoting towards global teams building up to help deliver it at a local level. I think also in terms of processes, there's been complete transformation. In the last 3 years, I've been working with sustainability in the business for about 12 years. In the last 3 years, I've seen more change in the last 3 years than I saw in the previous 9 years. Thank you.
29 years. No.
So the point being, thank you, Jane, that it's amazing. The reporting, the finance, the treasury, they've all got their own teams now that understand it. So that is transformative change. It's not really in the total business model, but it's certainly in the way we do business. And that has mostly come from customers, investors, stakeholders, less so from consumers, as we discussed, but they're really driving change very quickly. And it's been absolutely kind of amazing how much has changed over the last couple of years. So,
you know, to come back to your question about did it change something in the way, you know, in the company? For us, it's a bit specific, because in the water sector anyway, it cannot be delocalized. So it's fully embedded in the operations from the beginning. It's not like it's not CSR. You know, first of all, you know, we need to take care of the water in terms of quantity, but also we need to protect it. There's no choice when you do mineral water. So for a long time, even before AWS, but I know that Nestle was there from the beginning, because they understood it had to be structured. But for a long time, we had to protect the upstream area, and to do so, you needed any way to embark. So stakeholder engagement was, I think, you know, very, very important at that stage, and the quality of the water too. Now, when it comes, it was more like new topics such as biodiversity. You could say, you know, if you go and see a site manager a few years ago, they say, all right, I understand about the water quality, I understand about water quantity, but protecting biodiversity isn't it on top of all that? But then they understood, and we had some projects on, you know, nature-based solutions, and you know, they understood the virtue, that it was also virtuous, you know, to work on the biodiversity. So, and the governance is the same. We are, you know, always in relations with the authorities. It's not just us using water, it's all the water users in the catchment. So the governance piece was understood for a long time. But with AWS, what was great, I think, is that the approach was suddenly comprehensive. You know, there was something that was capturing everything, including WASH, and it's great. It helps. Yeah.
Paul, was there anything you wanted to add initially? Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you all. All right, other questions? Go, sorry. Yeah. Hey. Thank you, Michael.
Yes, thank you. My name is Joost Verbart. I work for World WaterNet in Kenya. I want to ask a question to Michael. First of all, thank you all for being here. Also, as a young person, it's really hopeful to see also the big corporations on these panels. What World WaterNet does, it connects the water utility of Amsterdam to water utilities in developing countries. So the idea is that the experts that worked 20, 30 years already in the Water Board of Amsterdam, they peer-to-peer exchange their knowledge with Kenya, in my case. So on a daily basis, I'm at those basin offices, as you mentioned. And when you are there and you connect them to their knowledge exchange partners, you see the real needs. Like maybe they do everything by paper, which is super time consuming. Maybe they need training on certain digitalization things we support in mapping the abstractions and pollutions. But now it comes to the funding of the program is funded by Foreign Affairs, and they want to see those sexy numbers. Say we have access for 20 million people in 2030 to clean and safe water. And now the struggle for us is how do you connect capacity building and all your activities in the basin to those sexy numbers? We hustle, we do it, but those water management managers have 30 or 40 years experience and they already find it difficult. So I was wondering, for a company as yours, if you do activities in these basins, I also heard you speak about numerical wishes or outcomes that you desire. Maybe you can explain a bit what they are and how you translate your activities to those outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, we were only allowed one.
So the context there is that Diageo's subsidiary is East African Breweries Limited, which is headquartered in Nairobi, and we have a high market share in Kenya and Tanzania and Uganda. And Tusker Brewery in the center of Nairobi is one of the highest industrial water users in the Upper Tana catchment. So that's why it's so appropriate perhaps to discuss it in terms of your context and your experience. And I think, well, we have a twofold kind of a challenge. We've just invested about $10 million in water recycling and reuse at our brewery. Well, we have to do that to get our efficiency down to what we've set to for our 2030 target. So that target has driven that investment. And that's the minimum we should do, as we've discussed. And then what we have up beyond that is to work with a replenishment. So that's doing activities mostly in our smallholder farmer communities in the Mount Kenya area and the Noko Rift Valley area, to work with those barley farmers and the sorghum farmers to help them access to wash, to help with reforestation. So those are replenishment programs of which we can use the VWBA, the water benefit accounting, to measure that, but there's obviously lots of co-benefits. And then thirdly, there's collective action. So what are we doing working with the basin authority? What are we doing working with the resources, water resources department, and how are we driving change there? Where we're members of the Upper Tana Water Fund, which was created by TNC, and you may be familiar with, and that's, you know, needs more resources, and to your point, probably needs to pull in more government stakeholders, but is a fund that is active and been active for over a decade now. So that's one area we can do. But I do think the point I made about policy, and Diageo, or EABL, is the second largest quoted company on the Nairobi Stock Exchange. It's a big employer, it's a big influencer, and it needs to probably step up. So we are talking to UNEP, which is just down the road from our brewery, and really trying to understand how we can work with them, but also work with government in terms of turning that. So we did convene a meeting about almost a decade ago to try and get all those industrial users together, the Kenya Association of Manufacturers, CAM, getting them together to understand how we can work together. But I think it's a good challenge. I think, you know, it's brilliant to hear. I wasn't aware of your program. I think that's fantastic. But also you obviously want to hand that over. You want to end game, don't you? And you want a measurable outcome from that. And I think companies, high water users such as ourselves in that catchment, need to play their part. And maybe being part of the water fund, or supercharging the water fund, Upper Tana Water Fund, further, or looking to other ways in which we can collaborate perhaps more directly with policy and regulators. And one of the biggest problems in that area is illegal boreholes, as you're probably aware of. And you know, we're extracting through boreholes as well, but we're obviously monitoring and managing them, and we're recycling our water. but we need to work with capability building and regulation, tighten regulation around that, but also long-term infrastructure. They have their master plan. How can we help them deliver their master plan, which is probably already 10 years behind schedule? So yeah, good question. I'm sure there's other kind of reflections on the basin piece and how we can work more generically with regulators. But
I will say
Paul
Kenya
made that
is one
point.
of those ideal places to work, I think, because of the existence of the master plan, the Nairobi Water Services Trust Fund. As a donor coming in there, they know their needs, and it's not a lot of donors headed toward the same need. So they have nice, I will say, traffic cop capabilities to put you in the right direction. So if you want a connection there, you can see me after the panel. Okay. Other questions? Let's see. Sorry, somebody. Thanks, Michael. Michael, you're my favorite brother right now. Thank you.
My name is Sanjeev Chadha. I work with different organizations and I'm on the board of the Pacific Institute. So this question is not for Jason.
Okay.
No, but honestly, it's thank you to all the members of the panel. It's great to see the progress being made, but given that time is of the essence, there's clearly a lot more which needs to be done in a lot shorter time, right? Today, I would argue there are a handful of companies which are doing a good job. That number needs to be in the thousands. There are some companies who have clear objectives like net positive impact, whichever way it's measured, but they genuinely can and need to do a lot beyond that as well. And the list goes on. So, and yet the potential that the corporate sector can bring to this solution is tremendous. Not just given their consumption, but given their experience, given their global reach, and to be honest, given the organization capability, which is lacking, I think, otherwise, and the very good but fragmented initiatives which are taking place around the world. So my question to you folks is, what are the one or two things which need to be done, which can dramatically accelerate progress in the corporate sector?
Great. Bring the mic back up, please. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yes. Yes. We don't have a take back initiative for the mic, unfortunately. Thank you, Sanjeev. Thank you. There we go. Okay.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. I can reflect on some of the attempts to do that, right? We've talked a lot over the past few years of using investors and financial institutions to catalyze action. There's been some success in that. I don't think it's success at scale by any means, but there's been some success. I've also seen success working through industry associations. Right. So different industry associations that are focused on advancing environmental and social objectives like ICMM and BEER have done a lot of good in advancing the agenda and on raising the expectations of members of their industry. So those are two things. And then maybe the third one that I think maybe is a bit more untapped, and we alluded to that in some of the sessions earlier this week, is I think corporations can do a lot more by working across their supply chain, right? Because if you said, we need it in the thousands, I think there are probably 60,000 listed companies in the world. A lot of those companies are in each other's supply chain, right? Not everyone is facing the consumer. So how do we look up and down our value chains and catalyze action through our influence in value chains to get others to follow suit? So I think right now that's perhaps where I'd put my 2 cents, is in really leveraging our influence in value chains upstream and downstream to get others to mobilize.
And I'll just add too, I think tools such as this catchment analysis and lifting that as a recipe to lift everybody's eyes up to what's possible, what the menu of options of actions could be to really make difference in the catchment level, and then identifying the partners, that makes it easy for people to engage. And so when their shareholders put pressure or their stakeholders put pressure, they're like, I got to do something quickly. The table's already set. So.
Yeah, I was just going to add that, and I probably won't be popular for saying this, but I think regulation, I think international regulation, I think this The decision in the US around scope 3 was a game changer, and requirement to report in scope 3 is a game changer. I think there's a lot we can learn from the carbon and climate world in terms of forcing. It's not perhaps what we want, but it's absolutely forcing companies to address this. So if you look at TCFD, that's asking you to quantify your water risk or your climate risk, which 90% of probably is water, and to quantify it and to scenario plan against it. That's forced a lot of companies start to look at climate, and then they realize actually climate's water on the ground. And it's only one dimension. It's not going to necessarily drive a lot of collective action on the ground, but if you take it to its next stage and say, you've got to report your risk on water as much as you do on carbon and scope 3 carbon. So let's talk scope 3 water. What's your scope 3 water risk, right? Okay, so you quantify it and you use all the models you do, hopefully consistently. And then you say, okay, so the next question from the investor or anybody else is, what are you doing about it? Now, that's not easy. That's a lot more complicated than carbon because you just don't decarbonize your supply chain, but actually it's more complicated. So there is a bit of a stick there that could come in there and learning it. We don't have a net zero standard. We don't have a GHG protocol. We don't have a TNFD, the Task Force on Nature Photography, but all of those are really effective mechanisms, I think, to start to make companies. And I think it's probably the wrong way around, perhaps, but I think it will lead to a lot of action on the ground. And if there's if those companies are actually forced, and those are obviously only quoted companies, but Paul's point about supply chains, some of our suppliers are bigger than us and bigger quoted companies. So we should be much more heavily engaged with them and understanding what their risks and right up through the supply chains. I totally agree.
One example on that is what Walmart did. When Walmart started requiring sustainability performance, it shifted the market completely. It's like, either do you want to sell to Walmart or do you not?
No, I just no, I mean, I agree with those points that everyone said, but I think also going back to what I said right at the beginning about these anchor initiatives, where you've got a bunch of corporates that are very active on this particular topic, how can they be catalyzed to really influence others in the area? I think that's key. I think municipalities have a really important role to play, especially in fast-growing African cities where you've got a whole range of regulated and non-regulated activities going on. I think that municipalities should be demanding more and should be putting investment into trying to sort that out. And if that's something they can't afford, I think this is also where the donor community has a role to play. Rather than seeing the investment, the income they want corporates to put into solving problems, they need to start looking at how they can invest in municipalities to bring them into the conversation for the value and the impact that they can get out of that, rather than it being purely about cost. It's actually about the impact that activities can have across the SDGs that the donor community is pushing for.
Well said.
I'm going to give it back to Michael when I'm finished talking. But, so I know I wasn't supposed to answer the question, but I agree with everything that's been said. And I want to add 2 points. One is it's a little bit pessimistic, but I find that most of the companies that have been leading on water actually had some crisis along the way where it got really real for them. And then they started taking it more seriously and taking action. And maybe that's just human nature and institutional nature that you kind of have to have that crisis to get it real. But the flip side of that is we have always tried to cast stewardship as having a business case. And I think the more that the stories of companies that have led on water that have actually had business value out of that is going to bring all the rest of the companies along. And I can give you a couple of examples of this. Braskem, the chemical interest in Brazil, had done some water risk assessment in their region in the Sao Paulo area. And then they started running some climate forecasting. There were some droughts where there's curtailments of water across the metropolitan area for electricity and water, hydroelectric connection there. And everyone got either shut down or cut back on water availability. And that obviously has a bottom line impact for companies. Then they started forecasting scenarios around climate change, and they started looking at the probability of water supply unreliability. And based on that analysis, they were able to go to their COO and say, we need to invest in some strategies that are going to help us be more resilient to what we anticipate the water impacts of climate change being. So they entered into, at the time, the biggest water reuse project with the wastewater treatment facility in Sao Paulo, and took 100% of their water off of that municipal wastewater supply. They got 6 more companies to come in. And when the next drought happened, they were one of the few companies that had zero impact on their ability to operate, while there were others that were getting curtailment. So all of a sudden there's a real value here on what it meant to take some action on water ahead of time. And I think the more that companies can see that, that's a bottom line benefit, the more that the companies are going to get drawn to doing something on water.
Well said. And you know, with a lot of companies we work with, we do encourage off-grid types of solutions proactively. I mean, it's going to be needed no matter what. Okay, one more quick question and then we're going to do a wrap up. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdi Wario. I work with Gatsby Africa, based in Nairobi. There is a general consensus that is coming out from the panel that we need to move the water stewardship from supply chain actors alone and include system-wide adaptation. So what are some of the quick wins that either corporate or civil society organization can pick so that we can adopt a system-wide approach? Because as an organization, we are also working closely with different institutions within the country to ensure that there is that element of, instead of doing pilot project here and there, we have a system-wide approach to interventions.
No, I have not the quick win for the quick wins. I don't have an answer. Then I will pass over to my colleague maybe. But if you talk about systemic change and others, we haven't talked a lot about. We have food and beverage here at the table. We don't have producing of food systems, and I think that is a main important part of this. But the other way is also when we are talking about stakeholders, we haven't mentioned a lot the consumer part, and also I think the consumers have a role to play in that system. Just for I have 30 seconds. Okay. Last year, I tried to present at the Water Stewardship Forum the idea of going from water efficiency to water effectiveness. This was more just a dream, but it was an idea to put in the room in order to have some discussion about it. Meaning, what do we mean with that shift? Meaning, okay. Not just consider the water consumption in a production, for instance, but also consider the impacts on social, ecological, etc., etc. Coming from the example, for instance, that potatoes are growing in the desert of Egypt and bring to Europe in some seasons where we don't produce potato. Coming from an impact. Okay, so we can look at the water footprint, but not only to go further than this and consider all the system and calling that water effectiveness. But this means a big challenge in all businesses. So that's why I'm talking about a dream, a new idea. Why not to develop? But this could bring some major changes in the system. But of course, that's not from the corporate perspective. Just to bring the idea.
Yeah, just bring one idea here, but I think this new piece in the puzzle, which is about the societal return on investment, is something that also should be very virtuous internally within the companies, but mainly, to go and embark externally all the partners, local authorities. We mentioned the municipalities and others. The day we can go and talk to them not only about the risks, but really about the value that is created through the projects. I think it might be one of the game changers. It's not a quick win, but at least potentially a game changer. So.
Anyone else? Okay, good. Well, let's kind of wrap right now and we can start back with Pierre, but if you're projecting next year, coming back to Stockholm, maybe 2 years from now, what are some of the trends that you would like to see really trending as it relates to a catchment level? So what actions are you going to want to see? What's going to show you that we're making progress? And all of you are going to answer that.
Yeah. So the very short answer should be to go to water efficiency to water effectiveness, but I just mentioned it. So
okay, that's okay. You can
okay.
I'd like to cast my vote for having open source catchment diagnostics completed with clearly identified shared challenges and may I ask root causes of the shared challenges. I don't want to hear, water scarcity. What's the driver? Where is it? Surface, ground, demand, what demand? Industry, domestic, what's the problem? And if we can do that and create consensus, it's going to be a lot easier to catalyze action and collective action because we're going to be aligned on what we're moving towards.
Well said.
Yeah, I agree with this 100%. And there are lots of debates about a kind of unique platform. You know, there was lots of sessions this week. To us, it will be critical. You know, that would be a game changer. If we talk about the changes in 1 year, to me, it would be a massive scale up on you know, the implementation of the AWS standard again, so that we all speak the same language. It could be another one, but I don't know another one.
Yeah.
So you know, we need consensus, at least on the diagnosis. Otherwise,
Yeah.
you know, people will just say, okay, I wait and see, because there are some disagreements between the organizations.
Very well. Good.
Two, firstly, James's first point about further consolidation and consensus around what it means and how we're going to do it. So I agree with him. There has been that sense of the kind of organized chaos is getting a little bit more organized, and I think that's good. And I think everything I've heard this week is we're getting more organized. So that's the first thing. That's the how, and I think the what would be back to my point about policy. How can we have a structured approach to engaging with governments on the policy agenda? And maybe we should use UN 2023 next March to really try and cement a process that's consistent across businesses and NGOs, how we engage with governments proactively to get this agenda. And there's a lot of work in that area, and I'd love to know how corporates can contribute to that and actually help implement it.
Hear, hear. Okay, great. James.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are all great points, actually. I'm going to write them down and use them. I think two things. One, regulators, you know, having regulators here talking to us about the problems they face, the challenges they face.
I'll get a regulator brother.
Okay, that's what we need. Or maybe
Or
a sister, actually.
Or sister. We'll get a sister. Get Felicia.
That would be important. And I think maybe just being able to display beyond basins the value of this approach.
Yeah.
Through the value chain, through influencing the company, so influencing business processes, influencing through the value chain, influencing your procurement, all of those things, getting a bigger holistic picture of what does that mean? Where should we be putting more effort in? Because to a certain extent, you can fix things at the basin level. You may not own all the results, but you can fix what you do. You can try and influence others, but there's other things that you can do within your business that maybe we need to sort of have a better look at that.
Okay, good.
So next year, if we could build on what I found to be some of the most interesting conversations this year and some real epiphanies of some important work that lies ahead for us, is about if we accept that we're going to do more stuff collectively, and almost back to your question of there's a series of activities, how do we actually translate that into the sexy outcomes and impacts that everyone wants to know? Well, if we're in collaborative structures and we start thinking about the multiple benefits of these interventions we're doing, how do we get to claim those outcomes and those impacts? What's a fair way to do that will allow everyone to feel like they're meeting their own individual goals, but we have these shared goals. And I think there's going to be some really interesting conversations around how can we do that effectively. And by next year, I'm really hopeful that there will be some agreements on what we can do, because I think that's right now a little bit of an obstacle, and something that if we can get over, we can get more companies leaning into investing in these projects and making sure that it's in alignment with their own enterprise goals.
Well, it sounds like we just did the strategic planning for the Water Resilience Coalition and the CO Water Mandate for the coming year. So I would say for mine too, it's those products, Paul, that you mentioned, but also with the urgency on the catchments where people are most suffering. And that's probably Asia, Africa, you know, the biggest numbers of people really. So let's take a minute and thank our panelists. Thank you all so much for your contribution. I thought it was a great conversation, and thanks for joining Stockholm World Water Week.